In March 2018, New Zealand's intelligence service acknowledged for the first time what the country's government had long tried to conceal. In 1981, while Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the Duke of Edinburgh were on an official visit to Dunedin, an assassination attempt was made on the monarch. The shooter turned out to be a 17-year-old teenager named Christopher Lewis. It turns out that the New Zealand government was aware of the incident from the very beginning. Intelligence documents, which until recently were classified, mention how in October 1981, a local teenager hid in a building whose windows overlooked Her Majesty's parade and fired at the monarch. Christopher missed, and the sound heard by the crowd was attributed to a sign that had fallen nearby. The police, however, tracked down the perpetrator. He is no longer alive. In 1997, while in prison, he committed suicide. Now that the case has been made public, the police have reopened the investigation. Buckingham Palace, however, is declining to comment. But this is hardly surprising. Throughout British history, the monarchy has repeatedly been targeted by extremists, terrorists, or simply mentally unstable criminals. Needless to say, even in the last century, members of the royal family have been the targets of dozens of assassination attempts of varying severity. The so-called Lithgow Plot was one of the first attempts on the life of a British monarch. That year, Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh were on an official visit to Australia. As the royal couple was traveling from Sydney to Orange, their train struck a massive log lying across the tracks. The conspirators had planned to cause a train derailment. Having calculated the usual speed of trains on that stretch of track, they placed the log so that the train would derail. However, on that very day, the train engineer decided for some reason to slow down, which allowed him to spot the foreign object in time and apply the brakes. As a result, the train did indeed hit the log, but no one was injured. The perpetrators were never found, and Elizabeth and Philip were kept in the dark for a long time so as not to damage Australia's image. A truly unique incident occurred involving Princess Anne. Yes, she too was the target of an attack, though not with the intent to kill, but rather to kidnap her and demand a ransom of £2 million. In March 1974, the princess was driving home with her first husband, Mark Phillips, when a white Ford Escort suddenly cut off the royal limousine 200 yards from the palace. An assailant named Ian Ball quickly jumped out of the car and immediately opened fire on the princess's bodyguard and driver. He ordered Anne herself to get out of the car, threatening to shoot her if she disobeyed. The incident was noticed by a journalist following Anna and a police officer, but the criminal managed to wound them all. Reportedly, the princess was saved by a passerby who, by a stroke of luck, happened to be a boxer. He briefly knocked the attacker unconscious, after which police reinforcements detained him. The attacker was found to be mentally ill. This is one of those rare instances where the perpetrator's plans actually succeeded. Prince Philip's uncle, Lord Mountbatten, became the first member of the royal family to be assassinated. In the summer of 1979, members of the terrorist organization IRA, Irish Republican Army, planted a bomb on his yacht. The explosion killed Lord Mountbatten himself, as well as several members of his family. The IRA immediately claimed responsibility for the attack, and shortly thereafter, the police arrested the bomber himself and sentenced him to life in prison. However, 19 years later, he was released as a result of negotiations between the British government and the Northern Irish leadership. It's interesting to note, by the way, that long before the incident described above took place in New Zealand, a similar assassination attempt was made on Elizabeth, also involving a bullet, also during a parade, and also by a 17-year-old teenager. It happened on the day of the traditional Trooping the Colour ceremony, a British national holiday. Elizabeth was on horseback at the time, leading the parade. Suddenly, an unknown individual in the crowd fired a couple of shots in the Queen's direction, which, of course, frightened Her Majesty, but more importantly, also frightened her horse, which immediately tried to throw its crowned rider to the ground. Fortunately, Elizabeth managed to calm the animal, and the shooter was immediately apprehended. He turned out to be a 17-year-old boy named Marcus Sargent, who, as it turned out, simply wanted to become famous. His fate is currently unknown. Elizabeth, however, after calming her horse, and herself, continued the parade and returned triumphantly to Buckingham Palace. Attempts on the lives of members of the royal family by citizens of Australia and New Zealand have long been the subject of national humor. Surprisingly, after several crimes against Elizabeth, her son, Prince Charles of Wales, also survived an assassination attempt in Australia. The shots, however, were fired with blank cartridges, and the assailant, 24-year-old David Kang, was immediately apprehended by security personnel. It turned out that Mr. Kang's stunt was purely political, intended to draw attention to the plight of local refugees. However, the man was convicted merely of disorderly conduct, and he currently lives peacefully in Australia and works as a lawyer. Fortunately, no one witnessed the aftermath of this assassination attempt. But what British intelligence later revealed is frightening enough. It turned out that in 2015, Her Majesty's armed forces eliminated an ISIS militant in Syria, who, according to reports, had sent a request to the UK to carry out several terrorist attacks across London. One of them was supposed to take place on Victory over Japan Day, which is celebrated in the country on August 14th, and was to be attended, among others, by Prince Charles of Wales and his wife, Duchess Camilla. One of Her Majesty's former bodyguards once confessed to the press that he had once come close to shooting Elizabeth himself. The thing is, the Queen was suffering from insomnia that night, and to cope with it, she decided to take a short walk around Buckingham Palace. A guard patrolling the grounds spotted Her Majesty's figure in the distance, and, assuming it might be an intruder, rushed menacingly toward her. Fortunately, the man had the presence of mind to take a closer look at the shadow before drawing his weapon. During Prince George's first week at Thomas's Battersea, a fan of his secretly infiltrated the school, sending shivers down the spines of his classmates' parents. However, it turned out that this wasn't the worst of it. In late October 2017, British media reported that the country's intelligence agencies had detected suspicious messages on the Telegram messaging app. Allegedly, ISIS extremists were exchanging photos of Prince George entering school. The security services also discovered a phrase in Arabic: "We won't even leave the royal family alone." Fortunately, however, the report either turned out to be a hoax or the security services managed to prevent a terrorist attack.